So this morning we cast these pieces for Cremone bolts, and here are the gloss wax castings. They've just been cast, devested, which is just the process of removing the plaster. It's done with a high pressure water jet, and we've really just cut one of them off a tree, or off the gates, and we're going to start polishing it up and working on it now. So you can see on this casting, this is typical. This flat area has some inclusions and some little pits and holes, and typical of castings, especially in a very thin area. So traditionally what was done was we take a chisel like this chisel, and we just put a sand-like or pebble texture all over this area. That way, when you go to polish, you're not polishing off this edge and tearing out this edge. So this is how it would appear on a Cremone bolt. This goes over the top, and the rod just slides through here. So the remainder of the Cremone hardware has a sort of a sand or a pebble texture up here, so what we're going to do today is just put that sand texture onto this flat face. In the process of putting the sand texture on, we're going to pretty much eliminate any of the issues we have over here with any porosity or bubbles or inclusions, and make it all go away. The sides, because they're nice and flat, are much easier to polish and sand and grind and get all of that stuff out of the way. But with this face with the raised border, we don't have the luxury of taking care of all that. So we're going to take this chisel, and we're going to use this chisel to put a pebble texture. Okay, so that's about half of it done. Now you can see after we after we do the chasing, the texture sort of It's uniform, but not totally perfect. It doesn't look like it's machine made because obviously it's not machine made. And you just end up with a nice handmade, a little bit of variation, nice handmade texture. So let's just finish this one up. It's nice to have extra hands. Part of what I'm doing is I'm going back over areas. As I'm sitting here, I'm about at the same height as the camera, a little bit lower. And I'm looking at how the reflections come off. And I don't know if you can see there, but it's a little bit shiny here. That just shows that I haven't kind of achieved the same level of depth in the texture. So I'm just going to go right back over that. Blend it right in. Now I have to keep the chisel in a pretty much the same orientation because as random as it is, if you start turning the chisel around in all different directions, it becomes obvious. You have to hold the chisel in a relatively perpendicular to the workpiece. Otherwise one side digs in farther, digs in more, and it leaves square corner marks, which you don't want. As you get close to the edges, you kind of have to rock the chisel just ever so slightly to make sure that you work right into that transition from the border to the flat plane. So that's about it. This is a little 100-gram chasing hammer, and it's if you're not familiar with chasing, this hammer, it's a very specific hammer for chasing. It looks a little bit peculiar in that you've got this very thin, long shaft in here, and this thin, long shaft is actually, it's flexible, it's a spring. So on the downstroke, the hammer actually flexes up, and then as you come down to the chisel, it snaps or whips, so it gives you a little bit of extra force. And then when it hits the chisel, it actually bounces back, and it puts a little bit of energy back into the hammer. So on your next downstroke, it actually gives you a little bit of extra energy. So here's the part all chased up. Ready to go. Just gets 4 holes drilled. We have to put a spring in the back here. It's an anti-rattle spring. It keeps the chromone rod from rattling. And magically, so there'll be another frog up on this end, and it'll cover the joint in the middle.